Welcome to another episode of Coder Conversations. If you haven't already, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Today, we're going to talk about what to do when things don't go according to plan. So, yeah, what's going on, Brian?
Not too much. How's your day going so far, Kevin?
Yeah, man, can't complain. The weather's finally starting to cool down, so I'm just enjoying the month or so of that. It's not
Yeah, I
super
like
hot.
uh, I like as they call it, hoodie weather. Where you wear a sweatshirt, take a hike, whatever.
Oh, yeah, it's not quite that here. It's like in the 70s, which I mean, that's perfect to me.
Yeah, no. Well, when I was living out in LA, it's like you get like 75-degree weather pretty much year round.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I mean, that's got to be pretty amazing.
Well, it's hard to leave. You come back to the East Coast or the Northeast or the tri-state or whatever, and you're getting snow. But actually, it's been warmer lately. I guess because of global warming or whatever, it has been warmer lately. The last winter here was really mild, like the most mild winter I've ever experienced on the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm not sure, like, what's going on with the weather, but I'm enjoying the good weather while we have it because it's either super hot or sometimes it gets super cold. So,
Yeah, in Texas, you get a lot of humidity, don't you?
certain parts is more like Houston and like Central Texas, but Houston is the most humid. Dallas not really that humid. Well, at least not to me, which I
Okay.
mean, I
Or like,
prefer. I
what
don't like
about
humidity.
San Antonio?
Yeah, I think they're pretty humid. They're closer to the like the bodies of water than like Dallas and North Texas.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean, like humidity, 100-degree weather. It's not a lot of fun.
No, that reminds me when I used to tour the US with one of the bands I was in, we go through states like Georgia and like through Atlanta. And Atlanta in August is just disgusting. Like 100% humidity, 100 degrees out. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. The humidity is really what makes it feel like hotter than normal. It's like you're in a sauna or something.
It's like Florida weather. They always get
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of humidity down there. So I would never want to live in Florida.
yeah. Florida's pretty bad, especially with all them hurricanes they've been getting recently.
Yeah, that too. Definitely that too.
But yeah, man, like with the weather being more and more unpredictable, it's harder to make plans because you never know what's going to come next.
Well, see, that's the funny thing about the West Coast, like Southern California. If there's like any kind of event planned and there's rain, no one will show up to the event. So, like, as a show promoter or as someone who's like throwing events, like you have to like be weary of the months when we do get rain, because if it does rain, no one wants to drive in it.
Yeah, that's what's interesting is like you can make all the plans in the world, but if some unforeseen circumstance happens, then what do you do next? Do you just cancel or do you try to find a way around it?
Yeah, and I guess that's to speak to like you said, the title of today is what do you do when your plan fails? It's like, we had someone scheduled for tonight for the podcast, but, they must have just forgotten about it or just, not checked their calendar or not checked LinkedIn today. So it's like, okay, well, what do you do when your podcast guest doesn't show up? Like me and Kevin, what we've been doing lately is we prepare ahead of time. We prepare topics that we can just both discuss, both talk about, and just because in case that someone does cancel, we still want to be able to have a show.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to think ahead, and because this is part of the podcast game. We're not paying the guests, so they don't necessarily have an incentive to show up, so they're showing up just out of
Correct.
their good grace. So so if they
Yeah.
don't show up, we gotta have something planned. That we gotta be ready.
Yeah, so it just makes more, more prep work for me and you. Like we just need to be more on the ball with, maybe world events or robotics or AI or just like some of the interesting topics that, we sometimes discuss on here. I know we have a guy coming on from that company, Figure AI. I think we have an engineer coming on from them sometime next month. So that should be a really interesting discussion about AI and robots.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is too is when you like really book way in advance, there's a greater likelihood of people canceling. So keeping that in mind is like your plan has to accommodate for people potentially canceling. Which is why we implemented the policy of contacting the guest ahead of time, but we may have to like contact them maybe a week ahead of time to see like, hey, are you still down to show up or
No, you're right. Yeah, because I've been contacting people the day before, but maybe there's some people that don't check their LinkedIn very often. So like, maybe if you give them a week heads up, they'll be less likely to cancel, right?
yeah, because like LinkedIn is a platform that people aren't always on every day. It's like they pop in every 2 or 3 weeks, and if they got this thing booked out 2 weeks ahead of time, they might not check, you know, on that exact day. And they're like, oh, I forgot about it. My bad. So
Right. Exactly. Exactly. No, it's
give them
just
a
like you said.
buffer.
It's part of the game. It's part of the podcast game. Like, we're doing this live, so it's like SNL. Like, you never know what's going to happen live. You never know if you're going to have connection issues. Restream app is like not going to, cooperate with us or whatever. We do the best we can to show up, but like sometimes the technology doesn't show up, or like we're talking about before, how Windows will like just take over your machine and restart. Like, because normally it says, oh, remind me in 24 hours or remind me in 1 week. Like, you could snooze the updates for Windows, but then randomly it'll just take control and it'll say, okay, we're restarting now. And that's happened now on two of the podcasts where I've been disconnected about like halfway through. So, it's all part of it. Technology, it's all, like you were saying before we were talking, like technology seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're doing live streams, there's a lot of stuff out of your control. And a lot of stuff you're not going to know ahead of time. So, once you experience it, then you can plan for it. Like, okay, I know Windows likes to restart randomly. So let me make sure and restart my computer and do the updates maybe like earlier on in the day, like 4 or 5 hours ahead of time. It's just
Yeah,
like
no, like as a safeguard. Yeah.
yeah, with experience, you start being able to know what's coming and you can plan ahead. But until then, you just have to be willing to improvise. And I think that's really important in life is improvisation because a lot of people they make plans and if something goes off plan and they completely crumble. Too much planning can make
Yeah,
you
well,
fragile.
and then to speak to that in terms, being a musician, like that's one of the things I love most about jazz. It's like it's free. You can do anything, you can say anything, and it'll be accepted and accommodated, and like you're playing with another musician and they're arranging and you're arranging and you're both composing and like you're going back and forth, and it's all improvisation. Like one of my buddies who I play with, we get together like once every other week, He's a more like a progressive rock guitarist, more like stuff like King Crimson, Yes, that like early '70s prog. He's real into a lot of that.
Right.
But you know, he brings a jazz mindset, a jazz mentality to our jams because every time we get together, we just improvise. We're not going for any prepared material. It's all off the top of the head.
Yeah, sometimes a lack of planning makes things better. It's like you got to find a perfect blend. Like you want to do some planning, but not so much to where you become like overly rigid and fragile. Like for me, even in my
Yeah.
career, I planned to get into finance. I got a degree in accounting. It didn't work out, but this pivot to programming was great.
Oh, absolutely.
What about you? Don't you have a similar story?
Well, for me, I went to a coding boot camp. It was a year-long program in Java Spring. So it's like, you know, basically Java, but we learned Spring as well. And pretty much we learned how to, like Spring Boot, I think, does it all for you. We learned how to do it manually. So that was interesting, but you know, I didn't really take to programming. Like when I was younger, I used to program, but like in much more basic apps like QBasic, Visual Basic. You know, these are nothing compared to a language like C++ or Java. You know, there's like, you know, Java. It's like the big boy languages, and I found it very difficult. I had a hard time adjusting to like the leak code style of interviews. Like I interviewed with Amazon one time, and they gave me like too easy or too medium questions from leak code, but I was always terrible at leak code. Like I would try to study and like write down the answers and try to memorize the answers. But the problem is if you don't understand the reasoning behind it, if you don't understand like the genesis of how do you go from the problem to the completed answer, you're missing a lot. So like I used to try to memorize the answers, but that didn't really help me that much with the data structures and the algorithms. So I found that very difficult. But yeah, I got into programming. I interned at one place. It was a cryptocurrency kind of finance place, and I interned there for about 10 months. And then I finally got a programming job after that doing React. But there was absolutely no training, no mentorship to be had. You know, I just kept asking them like, "Where's the training? Where's the training?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't really have that kind of training. Like, we just expect people to be able to do their job." And it's like, yeah, but you're bringing me in as a junior developer. Like, you got to expect that a junior guy or girl is going to need mentorship. You're going to need to learn the code base, you know. So instead, they just send me their whole code base, and they're like, "All right, start building out features on this app." And I'm just like, "Well, wait a second. Like, I don't even understand your code base. First of all, like, now you want me to build out features, like." So that, yeah, that plan ended up failing. I quit 2 weeks later, and then I switched my career to technical recruiting, and I did that for another year before just kind of finally like burning out in tech and going back to music.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about plans is that since you make them, a lot of times you become committed to something that's really not for you. Like, oh yeah, I've
Exactly.
been I've been studying this for 2 years, so I'm gonna just stick with it. But you really don't like it, or it's just not for you. So that's the other downside about
Yeah,
plans.
well, like with the programming, it just, you know, I liked it as a kid, but like I was saying, like I wasn't learning Java or JavaScript or C++ as a kid. I was doing these much more basic forms of programming, and so I found that enjoyable. But like once it actually got difficult, I just found myself like, you know, not wanting to do the projects or just like referencing other projects on GitHub already. Like, the same thing like with lead code, like you find the answers. And yes, you can understand the answers, but if you don't understand how you go from problem to answer, it's not really going to help you. Because, okay, then, yeah, you have a GitHub that has the project that you're trying to do, and it's all installed and it's all complete, but you don't understand how it got to be that way. And I think for me in programming, that was the major disconnect. Like, yeah, I could look up the answers, I could find the answers, but I couldn't figure out just like the whole genesis of how something goes from problem to being solved. That was always kind of a sticking point, a tough part of the programming for me.
Yeah, I mean, and you realize like certain things just aren't for you. Like, I did accounting for a long time. I just didn't like it, but oh, I'm committed since I got the degree. But
Right.
after a while, you just have to change course. Like, hey, this isn't for me. I don't care how much I have invested. This is not the destination I want to head to, and you just gotta
Yeah. So
change the direction.
for you, how did you come to realize, okay, accounting is like definitely not for me. I definitely don't want to work in that field.
I mean, like I could barely read like a few pages of a accounting book without falling asleep. It's like you just know something like it's not fun. I don't enjoy this. It's like why am I doing this? Like you
Just
could
because
tell like just
you figured it'd be a stable career, so that's probably why you did it.
well, I wanted to actually be in finance, like, but a lot of people who run mutual funds, things like that, they take accounting so they could better understand like how the financial statements are created, and that helps them be able to analyze them better. So
I
that's
see. So
pretty.
you wanted to pivot from accounting to finance at some point.
I didn't really ever want to be an accountant, but I wanted to use accounting to learn to better interpret financial statements so I could be in like the finance industry.
Now, would that entail like getting a master's in finance?
No, you don't need a master's, but like that's a really hard industry to break into anyway. So, I probably
So
would
in
have never
that
been
way,
able to.
it's like tech, where like you could like apply for job, like being an entry level guy, you could apply for jobs for years and get no traction. You
Yeah,
just
it
get
probably
zero
can.
traction in the tech industry.
I think it's probably even more difficult because there's only so many mutual funds out there, and you got to be really, really good to be the head of one of them. So that's probably more of
Yeah,
like a
you really
pipe.
got to know what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to, show demonstrated performance. But in order for you to know whether what you're doing is working, it takes years, because like that, you have to see whether the investments really pan out or not. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And that's another thing about like finance. You can't. It's unlike coding. You can see the results immediately. Like, okay, does this code work or not? Does it do what I think it's supposed
Or
to
like
do?
with like front end JavaScript, you could just like, do they call that the DOM? When you can just like edit it in real time.
Yeah, the DOM is pretty much like the browser representation of what you're seeing on screen, like the code
Okay.
representation of that.
Yeah,
So
I
the
just
cool
remember
thing.
being able to like write JavaScript code and just like process it straight there in the browser. Like you could edit websites, like you'd edit the code of a website and see like, oh, this website would look like this with a black background, or let me change the size of this window or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's the cool thing about front end coding, especially you can see the results immediately. You do something, you can verify whether it's right or wrong. Whereas with like finance, you're not gonna know until like years later, because say a stock goes down, then it
Yeah.
rockets up. So But like that, sometimes your plan failing is the best thing for you because otherwise you'd be stuck, doing something you just don't like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the way I look at it is I feel like it's God redirecting you. Like, you
Right.
went to school for accounting, but accounting just, it wasn't in the cards for you. You really didn't want to do it. You really wanted to do finance, but like you said, it's really hard to break into finance. So, like, what do you do? So then you just like took whatever job you could get doing that, and then you just start learning, coding on your downtime at your job or when you're home, and like it really stuck with you. Like, kind of for me, I've always done music. Like, I always wanted to do music professionally from like a very young age. I started playing the drums at 14 years old, and I would practice. I would do an hour of practice a day by myself, and then I was always in multiple bands. So like I would play for hours a day for years. So like from the age of 14 to the age of 22 when I moved out to LA, I was practicing at least an hour a day, sometimes 2 hours a day. Now I'm back to 2 hours a day again, really kind of like finding my stride once again. But it does take a toll. Like your hands get like really raw, calluses and like cuts, and like your hands get really dry, and the winter time. So it's definitely, it's like when you think about like Michael Jordan shooting all those free throws in the rain to get good, like that's how I look at it with music. Like I've put in my time to get to like where I'm at now, which is like at a pretty, I don't want to sound like big headed or anything, but like I'm at a pretty high level right now with my playing, and it took a really long time to get there. But like the cool thing about music is like it's all muscle memory. So even if you like, I took a couple years off from music, just some different life circumstances happened, and yeah, I moved. I was in LA, and then I had to move back home to Connecticut, and I was living in New York for a little bit with my aunt, and so just like different life changes happened, and I ended up coming back from the West Coast. But I've pretty much always done music. Like I've always like weaved in and out of it, teaching drums, doing studio sessions, doing session work, playing out with bands. So I've done a lot of that, but in recent years, I'm kind of just getting more back to doing lessons, because I really, I did miss that. I really, when I was doing when I was working in the tech industry, I was missing teaching, you know?
Right, right. So I mean, it's interesting how everything plays out. Like, yeah, you can make all these plans that you want, but God might have something different, and it ends up being way better because with our plans
Yeah,
we can only see so much.
sure. Like for me, so if we run the clock back, when I was 22, I had a indie rock band. It was me. My sister was actually in the group too. She was on backup vocals and keys and synthesizer. And then we were also in the band with this guy Steve, singer songwriter type. He wrote most of the music. Like we used to write together, but then he kind of took over because we went from like pop rock to indie rock, and I didn't really know how to write indie rock songs. It's very different, kind of structure wise. So yeah, that band, we moved out to LA at 22, and it was hard, man. Like I found myself having to do all the work. My bandmates didn't seem to want to help at all. So I'm
Lobo here, I think he might have got disconnected. Um, but yeah, just to continue on that point, you never know what's gonna be next. So when it comes to plans, you can make them, but You have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to deviate. You have to be able to accept that things might not always go as you predict. Oh, there we go, Brian. You back?
Yeah, yeah, I'm back.
Okay, but yeah, you was talking about your indie rock band, and
Oh
you know
yeah,
how.
so yeah, what happened with that is the indie rock band. We moved to LA. I'm 22 years old. The singer is like 20. My sister was like 25 or 26. She's like 4 years older than me. And my sister had lived out in LA previously doing acting and modeling. So like she kind of like let us know the lay of the land, like what different neighborhoods were like, where you might want to live, where are the musicians located, like so she knew all this stuff, so she was able to like teach us, which was great to like, have someone kind of like hold your hand at first, because usually you move into a new city and you're completely green, like you have no idea what you're doing. So luckily, since my sister had already been out to LA, she knew the area, she knew the lay of the land, so she was able to give us a lot of tips. But what ended up happening was I was doing basically all the booking myself. Like I was getting no help with the booking. And then I'd book a show, and then my sister would be like, "Oh, well, I really don't want to play there." Or the singer would be like, "Yeah, I don't really want to play at that bar." I'm like, what do you think? How do you think you're ever going to make it if you don't take the small gigs? You're not just going to get like the clubs that you want to play at, being a small fish just coming out green. You're not going to get these bigger club dates like Echo or Echoplex. There's a couple different places around LA that are like bigger venues, and like they just expected, oh, we're going to get on those shows, and I'm like, no, like we're not going to get on those shows. We're going to get on like smaller dive bars and like event spaces and stuff like that. And they just didn't really, I don't know, they weren't right there with me when it came to the hustle and the flow. They did not have the same mojo, that I had in like pushing things forward. They just didn't have that. So yeah, the band ended up breaking up after about a year, because pretty much after about 6 months of me booking stuff and them like complaining, I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna stop booking and we'll see what happens now. And they didn't book anything, and just like slowly the band fizzled out.
I mean, that's another thing about making plans is other people got to see the vision and be on the same wavelength. Otherwise, it's gonna end up going sideways because, like you say,
Oh
hey,
yeah. Well, especially with music, it's like people want to be there for the good times. People want to be there for the studio sessions. People want to be there for the pack shows. But like that's not every night. That's not your everyday. Like as a musician, you're gonna, especially having the experience of touring around the country, touring in other countries, what you realize is like some nights are popping off and other nights are just dead. Some nights there's bad weather, so like in LA, if it rains, no one will come to your show. That's just an example. But you have to be adaptable. And I think a lot of people in bands, they just figure, all right, I'm going to be there for the good times, but like I won't really participate in the bad times. But that's illogical. Like you have to be there for the bad times too. Kind of like all comes out in the wash, you could say. But a lot of musicians, that's I think where they get stuck up on, like, oh, I just want to live like the studio life, or I just want to play the big clubs. And like, yeah, that happens for some people. Some people get lucky and their band gets huge. But like for most people, you have to hustle. You have to have that grit. And my band members, they just didn't see eye to eye with me in terms of the amount of work that needed to be put in the band to make it a successful business venture. They just didn't see eye to eye with me, so it ended up breaking up.
well, I think that's why you need like two people who are or two or more people who are completely dedicated to pushing it forward. Because otherwise, you're gonna get that situation where it's like one guy's doing more work than the others, and he's feeling underappreciated, and he stops and everything just blows up.
Yeah, and I think when I think about like bands who have done it on like a more like minimal basis, probably the White Stripes. They're just like two people in the band. Because yeah, like you said, if you just have two people, it's a lot easier to control than like you have five, six different people with all different ideas. Um, that becomes more and more difficult to reconcile when you got all these different personalities going on.
Yeah, I think it just all, like anything, it just comes down to everybody being on the same page and wanting the same result. Like, it's more at scale, but it's just still the same thing. Like, you gotta, if everybody wants it, all of y'all would make a way to get it done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's like it makes me think of that group, the Black Keys. They're like blues rock. They're brothers, you know. So I think they
Right.
got one of them's a drummer, one of them's a guitarist. So I think they just said, "Well, the hell with this! Like, we're tired of basses flaking on us. We're tired of keyboard players flaking on us. Like, we're just going to go tour as brothers." And so that's what they did for a long time. They didn't even have a bass player play with them. Obviously, once they got big, like mainstream big, they had session musicians who they'd hire for their gigs. But for a long while, it was just these two brothers in a van touring around the country, touring around different countries, just like making a name for themselves. So, like you said, yeah, if you have at least two people that can reconcile and see eye to eye and put the same amount of work, the same amount of grit, same amount of mojo, gusto, whatever you want to call that, like that ingredient that you need to like make it in the industry. If you could have at least two people, I think it'd be way easier. And that was my issue. I was the only one in the band who had that kind of mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Because if it's only one person, then they're literally carrying everybody else, and it becomes too heavy. But if you have two or three people who are all dedicated, and especially in like different areas, that's when you have the breakout successes. Kind of like Steve Jobs and who was the other guy, Wozniak.
Yeah, Wozniak, he was the programmer.
Yeah, exactly. I think it really helps if you have two people who are motivated in like different areas. Like one's the technical guy, the other's a marketing guy, or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of makes me think of like our relationship with the podcast. Like, you're more like, you're a programmer. So, like, you got the website going on, you're taking care of the emails, you're like the main host, you do the introductions, and then I do pretty much all the booking. So, or like you do the thumbnails or the YouTube images, like
Yeah,
everyone has their strong points, and I
right,
think
right.
that's when you figure out a good business, when you can find like, okay, yeah, like Steve Jobs, he might not be a programmer, but he understands marketing. He knows how to get a product out there and in front of people, and that's really what it all really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to marketing. Like, how much can you network? To what degree can you network? How proficiently can you network? At how high of a level can you network? This is all marketing. But like from what I've found is that you need to put years into LinkedIn or years into some other kind of networking platform and really build yourself up on that platform. Like on LinkedIn, now I have something like 50,400 followers. So a pretty good amount. I mean, it would be cool if all of them were listening to our podcast right now. They're not, but it's kind of been the podcast ultimately will be a way to monetize some of those followers. Convert some of those followers into podcast subscribers. In other words.
Yeah, just say you need a team of individuals who can handle, different aspects to an optimal level. Like without the technical person, then you're gonna have a weak product. So if somebody can market it, they're selling junk, it's gonna break down and it's eventually gonna,
Yeah.
reflect on the company. But if you have a great product but no marketer, then nobody's gonna know about the product. It's not gonna sell. So
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest things about business is like you said, you need like with a band, like you need to like you need at least two people that have the same mindset, that have their head, screwed on in the same way to actually push things forward, like a Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Like, Steve Jobs is a master marketer. He could market anything seemingly, and that's kind of what you need. You need someone that really knows how to market, and then you need someone like technical that really understands the technical aspects of the product. And so I think that's what works really well with me and you. I'm more of the marketing and networking side of things, and you're more on the technological side. And it kind of, we weave together a basket, between the both of us.
yeah, it lets me focus on, the stuff I'm accustomed to doing, and you can focus on, the stuff that you're accustomed to doing. Like, you probably wouldn't necessarily want to like build a website and all of this stuff. Whereas I don't necessarily, I used to have to do the booking, but it's not my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it's very time consuming. Like
Right.
I spend most of my week networking and marketing and growing my LinkedIn and reaching out to people, reaching back out to people, letting people know about the podcast, asking people to come on the podcast. There's a lot of work, but like, someone's got to do the work. Kind of like in a band, like if
Yeah.
there's only one guy booking all the shows, at some point, that person's going to run out of steam. They're going to be like, let me get some help here. So I feel like for me, what's good in our relationship is I just focus on the marketing, and that's pretty much it. And you focus more on the technical aspect of things, which, someone needs to create the website and maintain the website and, create thumbnails for the YouTube videos. Like someone's got to do this stuff. So like you're able to take care of a lot of that. I'm able to take care of most of the booking, and it just, we have a good relationship, like we have a good business partnership in that way.
Yeah, it makes it, it lets you do what you do at a high level, and I can do what I do at a high level, and
Exactly.
it makes a product better because like I wouldn't be able to get some of the guests that you're able to get because you have a massive following, 50K, you're plugged into music, you know what I mean? You can focus completely on that. So, that's
Yeah.
what makes it powerful.
Like, yeah, for you, you have like close to 10K
Yeah, I'm getting close to 10K, but most of my stuff is like almost all programmers and tech people.
programmers. Yeah. I mean, a big bulk of my followers are all programmers too. Because when I was mainly building my network when I was still working in the tech industry. So because of that, I added, mostly different types of programmers, software developers, different types of engineers, architects, just really, or UX, even UX, UI. I was adding all different types like that. But since joining the podcast, I decided to start marketing in more specific areas, like specifically music industry or specifically tech industry or specifically game industry, or now I'm starting to get into film. I'm starting to network with people from HBO because I figured that it'd be really cool to have like a screenwriter from HBO on the show, production assistant, or something to do with production. I think is really interesting. So yeah, I've just been trying to expand out my current network with things that are like more relatable to the show. Because like, yeah, I have all these programmers and as followers, and that's great and all, but we don't want to only be a tech show. We want to also be a show about life in general. So how can you do that if you're cutting out all these other industries and only focusing on tech? So I think that's what's powerful about the marketing now is I'm out there trying to market with people in the music industry and the game industry, and people see my profile, they see all the followers, they're like, okay, 50K, I guess this guy knows what he's doing, been around the block a couple times. And so they see that, and I think so it's like I have a much higher probability to book people just because of my clout, because of my following on LinkedIn. It makes the networking like a lot less painful.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is like, initially this was planned to be like a tech show, programmer show, but the pivot off of software was, was a major change, but a great move because, it allowed us to make the show much more interesting, have a much wider variety of guests. So, just because you create an initial plan doesn't mean you just have to stick to that. Like if you see something better, don't be afraid to take a detour and,
Yeah.
do that different thing.
Yeah, like so. I mean, of course, there's like people who would be like, "Oh, okay, you guys are called coder combos," or like, I'm not a coder. I don't know if I should come on the show. And then they always kind of preface it like, "Hey, we used to be a programming only podcast, but we've since, pivoted. We've shifted over to like more like a techie Joe Rogan type of a show. More mainstream, dealing with not just tech industry, dealing with music." Film, game industry. So I think, yeah, by opening up the floodgates, so to speak, by like opening up the networking and the marketing to other industries, it makes it that much more impactful and it makes it that much more interesting because we're able on one night to have on a meta engineer, and then the next week we've got someone from HBO. So it's like, that variety, I think, is what sets our show apart from a lot of other shows. We have like really high level people coming in who are at the top of their game in their respective industry. And we're getting the inside tips from these people like, how did you get your internship? How did you break into the music industry? Like all these things that people don't really know how to do, we're trying to shine that light for the entry level people to say, hey, like, I want to break into music or I want to break into games, but I don't know how. And if they just follow our podcast and listen to some of our guests, they'll actually be given tidbits and little like trade secrets of, okay, this is how you do it. I think I might have
Hello, Brian,
lost
you
you
still
there.
with us?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think I
there you
lost
go.
you there. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, keep going.
Oh, what were you asking?
Oh no, you had cut out, so you was making a point before, kind of like about like I think it was in relation to the podcast and how you're booking and your philosophy on that.
Yeah, well, I've really expanded things since joining the podcast. I'm focusing on game industry, music industry, film industry. And I think maybe when it cut out, I was saying that like what sets our podcast apart from other podcasts is like we have really high level people in their respective industries coming on the show and giving away like trade secrets, telling people, oh, this is how you break into music or this is how you break into the game industry. Like with music, it seems like you need to get an internship for most of these big record labels. You need to first do an unpaid internship. They see that you're hungry, and then they bring you on after that. I mean, that's not always the case, but from kind of digging around, doing research on a lot of these people that work at record labels, you see that they in fact did come in through an internship.
I think you.
But I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like we're shining the light on areas that are kind of dark, like not in a bad way, but like shining a light on areas where people don't really know much about them. Like most people don't really know much about the music industry. So we're kind of shining a light on, okay, this is what this looks like at this level.
Right. Yeah, man, I'm glad we made the pivot, man. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good note to end the show on. My final point is like, making plans are good, but sometimes you going off plan might be even better, and you just have to have the ability to improvise. How about you? Do you have any closing thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, improvisation is huge. Like I said, I'm a huge jazz fan, jazz musician. I love improvising. I think improvising is great. So I think, it's almost like tonight, like, we had a nice conversation tonight, but we only had this specific conversation because someone canceled. So it's kind of like if you look at it from like a further view out, you take a look at it from like God's perspective, it's like, oh, well, this happened, so then XYZ is going to happen. So, I mean, we can't, that's the thing about planning. You have no idea if your plan is going to actually come to fruition. So, all you can do, you can, what is that saying? We make plans and God laughs. And that's the saying.
Right. I've never heard of that, but I could believe it. Like we're not really in control as much as we like
Yeah,
to
like
think.
we feel like we want to have control. We think that we have control, but like ultimately, like you're saying, you set up plans. Those plans fail. Like I went out to LA with a band. That band failed. I tried to do music just on my own. At some point, that got too difficult to do, so I moved back to the East Coast to be around family. So you just never know what's going to happen. But like, I'm glad I came back to the East Coast because I ended up losing my dad about 6 years ago. And so I was able to be there for the last year of his life when he had stage 4 liver cancer. So it's kind of like, I think God directs you down certain paths at different times in your life, and you kind of just have to go with it, Kevin?
Exactly. So yeah, man, that was a dope show, man. Appreciate you for stopping by tonight. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.